The letter H, or the letter, has written a lengthy response into the comments box of my video about not liking the iPhones. So let's take a look and see what we have here. He begins by saying, okay. Let me preface all this by saying that I don't like or dislike smartphones. I used to be more interested in them back when they were new and exciting and actually improving drastically every year, but I have lost interest around the time the iPhone dropped the headphone jack and iOS dropped the skeuomorphic design. I find them to be convenient, a useful tool when used correctly, and a luxurious privilege, but nothing beyond that. And like everything else, they have their pros and their cons. Okay, so just for those that don't know, skeuomorphic is the concept of an operating system visually replicating a material found in the physical world. So for example, Windows 7 Aero theme is supposed to look like glass. That's an example of a skeuomorphic design. Okay, so I remember the iPhones 4, I believe was the last one that I had. That was back when I was in high school. I had the 4, and it was a little bit different back then because they were starting to take over, but it wasn't like it is today. It's completely gone out of control since then, and we used them a lot in whatever year that was. I guess 2012 maybe it was, when I don't remember when it came out, but we used them a lot, but it wasn't like today. So really, I kind of lost interest. Well, obviously I lost interest at that point because I stopped owning one. It just kind of started to seem to me like it was the same thing over and over again. It was like the computers. They're getting more powerful, but the power level is not exceeding, or rather, you're not exceeding what the previous power level could do. So what does it matter if it's more powerful? You're never going to use the extra power. It's not like when we went from the Pentium. I just knocked over my microphone. It's not like when we went from, say, the Pentium 4 to the Core 2 Duo, and now it's like, wow, there's a big improvement. It's just negligible improvements that most people are never going to use. So I agree. I lost interest as well, but much before you did. I currently have a high-end Samsung one from 2018 that I got 2 years after it was released from a third party for less than half MSRP, and only because the previous phone I had that was still doing everything I wanted it to do broke. That one was from 2014, and I also got that one years later for far cheaper. I will keep my current one until it becomes unusable. I have an inexpensive, prepaid, no contract plan with an MVNO carrier that allows me to own my device. The only reason it's high-end is that it has a really good quality camera and a stylus pen, which is so much easier to use than the finger. I use it to make emergency phone calls, text, mostly when I'm home, from a paired computer with a real keyboard, take pictures and videos if I don't need to zoom, do compass navigation and music playback in the car, setting up what I want it to play while parked and not touching it after that, check the calendar, weather, email in the morning, use Discord or YouTube briefly or while I'm on my lunch break, and sometimes browse a support forum before I go to sleep. I like to contribute back where I have the knowledge to if I can, since I have made invaluable use of free support forums. I charge every evening to try to keep the battery above 50%, and I turn on the built-in Do Not Disturb feature during working hours, which prevents any distractions except text calls from people I know. I too could go without the phone at any time. So I think we have a pretty atypical use case here, because most people that buy these phones seem to camp out the night before a new one comes out and are willing to spend whatever it costs to buy the brand new one, even when their old one is working perfectly fine. We also know that, and this may be Apple specific, the batteries in the iPhones, at least they always used to, die within 2 years of owning the product. They would become considerably unreliable. I recall, and this is one of the things that really did me in when I had the last iPhone 4S. I had two of them. The first one, the battery started to become unreliable. What would happen was the thing would just randomly shut down anytime the battery got below 50-60%. So I got another one. I think it didn't cost anything because there was something that covered it or whatever. And then when the second one went the same way, I said, this is a joke. I'm done with this stupid thing. It's not worth anything. Forget it. Never again. So I know that the Samsung phones and some of the other ones allow you to replace the battery, which is very interesting and very practical. And so if you can keep changing out the battery as long as the cellular service doesn't get changed, you should be able to use the thing for a very long period of time. Again, I don't think most people do that. I think they race out and buy a new one just because it's new and just because another feature came on that they'll probably never use anyways. So the use case described here is very reasonable, exercises self-control, and really doesn't at all resemble how most people are using these things. I think one of the problematic ideas that you're still hanging on to, which seems to be skewing some of your views, is that it is still primarily a phone, and so consequently a large part of your judgment of its functionality is how well it can make and receive calls. This has not been the case for a long time. Yes, it's still called a smartphone, and Apple's version of it is called an iPhones, but computers are still called computers, even though we use them for far more than merely making calculations. They're still called laptops, even though it's a bad idea to put them on your lap. A webcam, or a Webra, doesn't have to be used on the internet or near a spider. What? A mouse? Oh, I completely didn't get that the first time I read it. A mouse is not always a rodent. You're probably not using spam to refer to gross canned pork most of the time. And Apple is the only company who's putting the word phone into the name of its product. Samsung's smartphone is called a Galaxy. Google's is called a Pixel. Sony's is called an Xperia or Zenfiri, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Motorola's is called Motoga, and some of Hawaii's is called an Honor. Point is, these are all just names, and their meanings are not intended to be taken at face value. The smartphone is to be seen as a handheld computer that just so happens to be able to make calls held up to your ear, not as a cellular telephone with a ton of extra features. Okay, so I still don't agree with that even with the explanation, and this is why. Even though the device is not intended to be primarily a phone, it is people's primary phone. So many people have got rid of the landline telephones and have nothing other than the iPhone in their house to make and receive calls. And this is happening for people that want the iPhone for their other features and people that don't. As the CDMA and 3G cell phones are starting to get phased out, particularly elderly people go to the cell phone store because they need a new phone, and they get coerced into buying an iPhone, and the reality is they are never going to do anything on that phone besides struggle to make and receive calls. People that work at home are usually given an iPhone to work at home, and they have a laptop as well, and so really the almost only purpose of that iPhone is going to be to make and receive calls. We have had good working phones for decades and decades, and they're inexpensive. Let's go back to, say, 2018. I can't remember when I did this, but several years ago, before the economy got all screwed up, I went on to the Amazon and I discovered that the AT&T 210 quarter trim line telephone was still under production and still for sale. The sale price was $5.99. And that phone that costs less than 6 beans makes crystal clear calls in and out every stinking time you use it. And it costs less than 6 beans. Now I understand the advantage of the iPhone would be that it's portable, but in pretty much every other factor, the AT&T 210 trimline quarter telephone for less than 6 beans is an intrinsically superior phone, sans the portability, to the iPhone. And what really, use case aside, it's absolutely baffling to me that such an expensive and advanced piece of equipment cannot perform a simple task. Not even with excellence, just with satisfactoriness. That's not even a word, but it can't even perform a satisfactory call. And yet it costs so much money, it's so advanced, there's so much technology in that thing, yet it can't even make a call right. That I can't get past that. It's like if Microsoft Words was inferior to the typewriter. It's ridiculous. It's taken at, to me it's common sense that there's certain programs that we use, like on the computer, for instance. Almost everybody uses the web browser. Almost everybody uses Words at some point. Maybe a lot of people use Outlook. If those basic functions on the computer stunk, people wouldn't accept the computer. And so then we go to the iPhone, and a basic function like making a call, which is a big enough deal to people to rely on that phone exclusively for that task. So it is a big deal. The phone part is a big deal if it's relied on exclusively. It's so bad. And yet, for some reason, people still accept it. So I guess people just don't care to talk on the phone anymore. I don't know. I have an iPhone that I use at work, issued by my employer. And it truly is the worst phone I've ever talked on. Compared to my cell phone, the basic flip phone, the audio quality is terrible. The volume is terrible. The outgoing audio is terrible. The reception is terrible. It's an awful phone. And yet the only thing that phone ever serves to do in that use case is make and receive calls, and it absolutely stinks at it. So I don't think it's a problematic idea. I think the phone aspect is a big deal. People rely on the phone aspect exclusively as their only means of telecommunication. And the fact that it's such a simple concept that's been around for so long and they can't even get it partially right, I can't get past that. That's baffling to me. So now we've established that that's not correct. Now that we've established what a smartphone is, we can move into why people accept that it does everything poorly. Put simply, it is a compromise. Smartphones were never meant to do everything with excellence. They were meant to do everything well enough, at least when they first came out. They have gotten better up to a point and have since stagnated, with a few exceptions in my opinion. And considering that all of the features are built into a package that can fit into a pocket and last approximately 6 hours with the screen on, approximately 3 days with it off, it's impressive what it does manage to do. If you're expecting it to do all that stuff as well as the standalone devices do, your expectations are quite faulty and need to be lowered drastically. Smartphones are not popular because they do everything as well as the standalone devices. They're popular because they do everything, and they do it portably and intuitively. Okay, so what's intuitive is completely objective. I personally struggle to use that iPhone that was issued by my employer. Particularly the Outlook program is a nightmare to use. It's a nightmare to type on. I would rather walk all the way across the building, go back to my office, sit down on my computer to write an email than to do it on that stupid phone. It's terrible. Here's an example that I want to talk about. I have the basic cell phone, and it actually has quite a few more features than I knew of when I purchased it. Recently, the radio in my car broke, which happened a couple years ago. I know how to fix it. I just haven't got around to fixing it yet. And so, in the morning when I go to work, there is a program on one of the local stations I like to listen to in the morning. And since the radio broke, I couldn't listen to it anymore. And I have a long drive to work. It's over half an hour. So I wanted to be able to listen to the program. So I says, okay, maybe I'll try to download the apps for the radio station, because they have an apps for some reason. And I'll put it into that iPhone, and I'll play the radio station through that apps in the car. Should be simple. Okay, so I installed the apps into the phone, which wasn't too bad. But then I opened the apps, and it was confusing to me. So I finally get it to play, and then I go to plug it into the audio jack in the car, because the problem with the radio in the car is the FM decoding chip needs to be reflowed. So the CD player still works, but I didn't want to use the CD because I can't get the program on a CD because the program is live every day. So the audio input on the radio still works. So I went to plug the audio input into the phone. There's no audio jack. What a flippin' joke! I knew when those things came out, the big to do was like, oh, it's got a they called them iPods at the time. Which was a music player. It's like it's got an iPods in it too, and you can play music on it. So you don't need the iPods anymore. So you can't even play music out of the stupid thing. Oh, great! So now you gotta get an adapter. So I get the stupid adapter, which the price of the Apple branded one was astronomical. So I got a cheap one because I'm not going to use it for long. If it break, it break. I don't care. So I got one, plugged the thing in, and it finally works after all that hassle. So the next day I plug it in, I'm getting ready to go to work, I get in the car, plug everything in, turn the car on, it works. Okay, I leave, driving down the road, everything is fine, and it stops working. It loses signal. The iPhones gets a terrible reception. I can talk on my basic phone from the house to work, and it never clips. It never loses the signal, nothing. Done it plenty of times. This stupid iPhones kept dropping the signal all the time. It was cutting in and out. It would stop for 20, 30 seconds, and it would start again, and then it would get really garbled because it was it was awful. I said, this is useless. So then I remembered my basic phone has an FM radio feature, which when I bought the thing I thought I would never use that. I says, hey, that's kind of interesting. Let me give this a shot. So I get the phone out. I open it up. I open the menu, tools, FM radio, simple, easy to get to. I found it to be intuitive, but again, that's subjective. It's personal to me. Turn the radio on. The phone's got a headphone jack. I open it up. I plug it in. Crystal clear reception. Same quality as would normally come into the radio waves. Worked 100%. Easy to set up. I had that going in less than 45 seconds. Easy. And you know what? It did it perfectly. I'm sure the reception wouldn't be too good if you got to the edge of the range of the station, because I think the pickup and the car radio is better, the antenna probably is better or whatnot, but worked perfectly fine. And so we have a device that does multiple things, and it did it landslides better than the iPhone did. Makes calls better. So we have a multifunction device that does all these different things, but it's doing them much better than the iPhones is. Smartphone cameras are one of the exceptions of stagnation that I mentioned before. They continue to improve every year. They've actually had manual exposure focus, optical image video stabilization, and a decent selection of higher-end visual effects for a while now, even limited slow-motion video. The only real thing they still lack is optical zooming, because it's just not physically possible, so that's where the multiple sensors are coming into play. The phones that have 3 cameras have a wide angle, standard, and telephoto lens. Of course, they're still not going to come anywhere near close to replicating the DSLRs that photographers swear by, but photographers are a fraction of society, as I'm sure you know. The general population can't tell the difference in photo quality after you pass the 2 megapixel mark. Same with sound quality of anything beyond their television. And by the way, only Apple phones have an issue with getting the pictures off. Android phones have micro SD card slots that you can save the pictures and videos directly to in a standard format. Okay, so if the general population can't tell the difference in photo quality after you pass the 2 megapixel mark, who cares if the camera's getting better? And person being able to tell aside on a 2-inch screen, or I guess they're bigger, like 5 inches now, on such a small screen, you can't tell the difference anyways because it's just not big enough. And everybody takes a stinking Verticam, and so you put it on the computer, it's still not big enough. It's a joke and a half. The 3 lens thing is interesting. I didn't know that. I mean, again, you're kind of just hoping that maybe the telephoto lens is the exact zoom X that you want, but that's an improvement. I'll give it that much. That's kind of clever. Okay. You know, I mean, I've been taking photography for probably close to 15 years now, and I have a DSLR camera, and there's certain photographs that you can't take with a point-and-shoot camera that you can take with a DSLR because you get the adjustment range. With that being said, the majority of my photography is not done on a DSLR camera. In fact, some of the best photographs I've taken were with a basic point-and-shoot camera. As we say in photography, the best camera is not the one with the highest specifications, but the one that you have in your hand when you want to take the photograph. And so there is something to be said about having the camera with you all the time. And if they're making it to have 3 different options, you know, that's better than just one. My personal preference still is to a pocket-sized point-and-shoot, which I keep with me, and that's how I take a photograph on the go if I need to take a photograph. My basic phone, which I've known it's had a camera since I got it, but I just never really felt the need to take photographs with it because I always kept my pocket-sized point-and-shoot with me. I actually used it to take pictures and videos a week or 2 ago when I was somewhere that I forgot to take my point-and-shoot with me. And I was very pleasantly surprised with the image quality for a non-camera device. I thought the photographs were great. The video wasn't too hot, but actually it kind of looked like a VHS video almost. I kind of liked it because it felt like a home video. But anyway, so the point is, what was I trying? Oh yeah, I was going to say, I had no trouble getting the photographs from the phone into the computer. I plugged it into my computer, came up like the regular camera does, and I imported it fine. And I happen to know that phone also has the micro SD option to expand the memory. I think it's got like 10 gigabytes in there reserved for the camera anyways, which the photographs were small. It didn't even use, I don't think it used 500 megabytes for 50 photographs. But it does have that option. Okay. I completely agree about the phones becoming anti-consumer which is a big reason as to why I've lost all my interest in them. Not being able to change the battery is a huge disappointment. Then there's losing the headphone ports, the IR blaster, the micro SD card slot on some very recent models. Gross. Yuck. Ew. This is why I won't buy one directly from the company. I'll always buy it used or new from a different source down the road. Now, arguably that's what I usually do. I typically buy things used from different sources rather than directly from the manufacturer. That's typically the case when I buy something that was made in China. We already talked about the battery issue and the headphones. I've never blasted infrareds from a phone before, so I don't care about that. And the micro SD card slot I think should be there. Okay, great. I'm getting old. Whatever. Actually, on the same video, I think. Yeah, here it is. I remember in 5th grade. When I was in 5th grade, the iPhone didn't exist yet. Okay. Since you like to get into philosophy and you went into the whole waste of time thing, one of life's most infamous unanswered questions is what the meaning of life is. The consensus opinion seems to be that you should make the most of it, either by contributing to society or simply enjoying it. Say you subscribe to the latter. If you're enjoying what you're doing on a phone, is the time really wasted? Well, of course this is personal to me, but one of the ways I typically answer that question is that at the end of your life, what are people going to remember you as? And I think the answer to that question has a lot to do with what the meaning of your life was. And if you compare somebody who spent a lot of time contributing to society and helping people, someone that was very memorable by the community after they're no longer with us, versus somebody who just played on their phone all day but had a great time doing it, no one's going to remember that person. Was that life well spent? I would argue that it wasn't. Again, that's firsthand to me, but that's my view on it. I'm astonished that you didn't get into the manufacturing, quality control, and moral issues again. Perhaps you're saving that for a separate video. But since you brought them up in the last smartphones video about the Verizon 2 scam, so I know it's another factor in why you don't like smartphones, I'll respond to that point as well because it contains a hypocrisy. So, supposedly you're not okay with purchasing an iPhone because you don't want to support slave labor in Asia, but yet you're perfectly okay with purchasing other goods that were produced for slave labor in Asia, in particular, fans. Ironically enough, you buy more fans from China than any typical consumer, and not even to use most of them legitimately, but just to see if they're any good, and then they get stashed away never to see the light of day again, except to maybe appear in a future video. The fans, too, are produced for slave labor, so in reality, you don't like smartphones for other reasons, but you have no problem supporting the slave labor so long as you're using it to obtain a product that you happen to approve of. Well, that's not entirely true, because Apple in particular is known, I mean, they're all bad. All the companies in China are not correct. But Apple, in particular, is known to have horrific conditions over there. There's been multiple reports of completely unlivable and completely inhumane, horrific conditions. So Apple is a much bigger offender than probably Samsung is, for example. As far as the fans go, the overwhelming majority of fans that I buy are purchased secondhand. I have bought a bunch of newer fans over the years. The only ones I can really think of that come to mind is a couple of the ones from Home Depot. You know, the TPI ones, which were actually good. I like those fans. You know, anything, I know it's not really, but The Air Queens are supposedly made in USA. The Lascos are supposedly made in USA. I don't really believe that, but whatever. I mean, there's some things you can't avoid buying from China. In this area, there's no fans at the thrift store. So if I want to take a fan to work, I'm not going to take an old fan that I care about to work. I got to buy a new one from China. I can't buy a cheap junk one at the thrift store because it'll be a year and a half before they turn up. I didn't bring that point up in the video because that's not the first thing that comes to mind. You can't buy a vintage cell phone. You can't. That's why I didn't bring it up, because it kind of was irrelevant. There's not a good non-Chinese made cell phone alternative. My phone is the Kyocera brand, which is a Japanese brand. I think it's mostly made in Japan, but it could also be like Lasco's made in America, where they really just make all the parts in China, and then they put a couple of screws in Japan and say, oh, we made it here in Japan. I don't know. But the point is, I didn't bring that up because none of the cell phones are made here. So it's not like you're making a choice between buying an American-made cell phone and buying a Chinese-made cell phone. They're all made in China, so it's kind of a moot point for this particular device. I still stand by that many of the faults that you blame the phones for are a fault of user error. Spelling and grammar errors in emails are a result of impatience and ignorance, not the phone, and the auto-spelling correction can be disavowed. You don't have to be fake on social media or use it at all, and that doesn't even have anything to do with the phones. It has to do with the social media sites' apps. You don't have to consume news media or silly videos. You don't have to let the phone alert you and make a noise for everything. Who cares what the phone is designed to do? Not using a product the way it was designed in order to extract better outcomes and resist negative consequences is not only possible, it's a form of creative ingenuity. Don't undermine people's ability to do this, because this ability needs to be located and embraced more than ever. It does, but when 98% of consumers use the thing the way it was intended, we have the problem that exists because of the way they're intended to be used. You happen to use yours with self-control. That is a super rare case. None of this is written with an intent to get you to reconsider a complete abhorrence of the smartphone. In fact, I'm sure I just wasted an hour of my life. And you're allowed to dislike them. But hopefully I've at least broke through the bias enough that you can correct some antiquated points that you had presented. Well, I don't think that was a waste of an hour, because it produced a good conversation. Maybe that point is antiquated.